All right, welcome to another episode of Go for CEO community. Excited to have this gentleman on. Got a chance to again, in my style, pick up a business card of people that I've met throughout my life and starting to have so much fun really learning about all these different industries, all these different people, these entrepreneurs, CEOs, founders of companies. And this is no different. Today we're going to learn a lot about this type of industry, and I won't give it away just yet. But remember, smash that like button, subscribe, and just be a part of the community. Share a comment, like this video, and reach out to our special guest today, and leave a message or find him on LinkedIn, and as he shares those ways to connect with him. But really get engaged and be a part of learning about how to go for CEO. So excited to have Mr. Joe Marley on. He's the president of the Signature Business Group. Joe, thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, John, thanks for having me. Been looking forward to this conversation. You had hit me up a couple of weeks back and indicated that you wanted to get on and talk, and I always enjoy the opportunity to maybe share some things that we've learned over the years in helping people sell businesses.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, and you're in that different type of business. Again, not traditional retail, not traditional, mechanic shop, not traditional, but in this space where you've kind of created your own mechanism. It is a very entrepreneurial type space. So you shared a little bit just there in selling their business and being a part of that. I know you're in the business brokerage world. So tell us a little bit about your background and kind of the thought patterns that got you to the Signature Business Group launch.
Okay. I'm originally from the East Coast. I was born in Brooklyn, grew up in South Jersey, actually went to high school in Atlantic City long before casinos and Donald Trump. Graduated from Rutgers with a degree in business, but we moved out to Chicago in, it was 1977. Big difference from South Jersey, kind of country, to downtown Chicago. I actually got involved in franchise sales when I was in Jersey with a couple of partners. We bought a small health salon, and it was sort of a side business. And the gentleman that owned that moved to Chicago and enticed me to come out and run a club that he had started up in Chicago. So my wife and I moved. As before we had children. But shortly after that, another opportunity came down the road that involved franchise sales again. It was with a company called the Bressler Ice Cream Stores. And back in the 80s, they probably had 450 stores across the country. And I was there, started out as a sales rep, grew in to become a vice president, was there about 8 or 9 years and traveled all over the country helping them expand their brand. Moved over to CarX for a number of years, did some consulting in franchise sales, worked with a number of other companies, got away from franchise sales for about 8 years with another startup company. And then they went through a transition and they changed management. And I had a decision to make. And was I going to go to work for a similar company, or was I going to maybe do something else? And that's when I decided that I was going to go back to selling businesses, but not in the franchise arena. A friend of mine, a gentleman that I worked with at Bressler's, was a business broker. And when we had existing franchises to sell, the franchisor typically doesn't do that. They find a broker that helps them find a buyer. We approve them. And I worked with a company called McLaughlin Group for a number of years and visited with him, and he convinced me that I should come on as an independent broker with him. This was back in probably 2000. And for a couple of years, I worked out of a Northbrook office as an independent broker. The interesting thing is, John, that starting your own business has its trials and tribulations. It took me over 1.5 years before I made any money. And I really wasn't prepared for that. I had a severance from my company and I had money put aside, but I envisioned, getting this thing off and going pretty quickly. It didn't happen that way, but it did. Eventually we got rock rolling, but I soon found out that I really didn't want to drive to Northbrook anymore from where I was, and he was getting ready to retire. And I decided that I was going to go on my own. I had enough understanding and his mentorship was helpful. And I really didn't want to take over his office and go and be using his brand, I was going to start my own. And so I did that. We've worked with people that are looking to sell a business, usually in what I call the retail level. So there's storefronts, could be food related. I do work for Dairy Queen. We do restaurants, pizza places, breakfast and lunch. But we also do flower shops and laundromats and hair salons, usually businesses that are somewhere between 100,000 in revenue to about $1 million in revenue, and usually somewhere in the middle is the sweet spot. And our job is to first help them value their business, because that's a key component of what we bring to the table, the ability to determine what is that business worth, what will it sell for. And there are formulas and there are methods of doing that, but a lot of it has to do with analyzing their financial statements. People buy businesses based on cash flow. I'm going to pay $500,000 for a business. How long does it take me to get that money back? And it'll depend on whether they're owner operators or whether they're going to be hiring a manager, et cetera. And so part of the things that we bring to the table is to help our clients determine what the worth of their business is. Once we do that, we then have to find them a qualified buyer. And to do that, in the old days when I was selling franchises, we'd advertise in newspapers. Well, nobody reads newspapers anymore. Everything is internet driven. And so that was a bit of a learning curve, because back in the late 80s, you picked up the Tribune, the last page of the sports page was all businesses for sale. Now there's nothing there for businesses for sale. Everything is on the internet. It also means that the buyers are much more educated and qualified to look, because they have a wealth of information online that helps them in their search. However, the broker, even though we're hired by the person selling the business, we probably spend more time with buyers than with the sellers, because buyers selling a business is a relationship sale. There has to be a certain amount of trust there, and just like it was in franchising. And they look for you to help guide them buy the right business, whether it's the one I got listed. And if it's not, then I'm going to tell them that. I don't need to waste their time or mine pursuing something that really is not a good fit. And that's helped over the years, by the way, because people respect the fact that you're honest with them, you're upfront with them. You're not selling them a car or life insurance or a vacuum cleaner. You're selling them something that's a life-changing event. They're going to follow a path, invest their money, their time, and their energy, and so you help them do that. You get paid by the seller, but the real appreciation also comes from the people who buy the businesses, because they also bring you more business coming down the road later on, because they'll refer people to you because they had a good experience with you or your company. And so I've enjoyed that. And working with people that own businesses has been fun. They're different than people who get a paycheck every week. They're entrepreneurs. They have a drive. They have an energy. They have a vibrance to them that's contagious, and it's kind of fun to be around. Now, some of them are a pain in the neck because they're so independent and they know everything. But that's the way the world is. So it's just you adapt and adjust to that.
I love it. You just laid the foundation of something that I'd love to go a little bit deeper on. You said, there's a lot of passion in what you feel that is life changing for someone. So people in the community here are listening about different industries and hopefully learning a lot about how to run those. So what was some of the foundational things that kind of crept in your heart and your mind? You started learning in that franchise model. You were kind of an intrapreneur for many years, and now led you towards that and going into your own business.
One of the reasons I got out of franchising was that you were selling one brand, and you had to believe in that brand, that it was going to be successful for the person buying it, not just because they paid you a salary to do it. And it really wasn't, there's no commissions in franchise sales. It's you get paid a salary and bonuses, et cetera, based on performance. But some companies after a while are not as viable as they were initially. And I kind of, my heart wasn't in it anymore. I couldn't sell somebody something because that's who I worked for. And that's what kind of soured me on that, finding the right. CarX was a wonderful company, by the way, and I enjoyed it, and their people were successful. They were bought out, and there was a change there which forced the sale. But so there's reasons why people make career changes, and sometimes it's because out of their control, the company makes decisions which affect the employees that work there, and I was one of them. Going off as an independent, I found that that same relationship that I had on the franchise side was there with buyers, but they look to you to give them direction and guidance on how to buy a business. They don't pay you for that, but it was part of what we do as business brokers. As business brokers, we don't sell houses, we don't lease vacant space. We sell businesses that have a track record. They have financial statements, they have a history. Sometimes they're very successful, sometimes they're not. Doesn't mean that they're not good opportunities, because you could bring your energy and your knowledge and your expertise to that business and make it better. And so when talking to people about buying a business, you kind of ask them questions as to what are they looking for? What are they trying to accomplish? Yes, income is important, but what's their end goal? What are they good at? What do they want to do? I got some people who get mad at me because I don't sell them the business they're calling on. I had a lady who wanted to buy a flower shop in Chicago by the lake. She lives in St. Charles. It made no sense to drive downtown every day to a 7-day-week business. And she got mad at me. Well, you're not helping me buy this business. I will, but you need to understand what you're getting into. And, eventually she understood, but initially she didn't quite get it. And maybe I'm my own worst enemy by, not helping her buy that business. But at the end of the day, I want to go back to that business and see that they're successful. I don't like to go back to a business and find out 2 years later they're not there anymore. And that has happened because the success of the business is the person running it. Just as you're building your business and I'm building mine, what you put into it is what you get out of it. Some people are good at what they do, and some people probably don't belong in business. They don't always know that going in. And so you try to help them make a good decision. And that's part of the reward. In my age, it's not just about money anymore. It's about helping people. But I like what I do. So that's kind of, I got into it.
You can really hear, the way that you kind of described even just that formula of taking someone and discovery, right? Usually. So tell us a little bit about that specific way of how you do business so that people can learn a little bit about your operation. So when you first get that lead or someone that gets referred to you, what kind of steps do you go over with them in a discovery type way so that you can open up those channels of communication and see if this is going to be a good fit for you and a good fit for what they're looking to buy?
Yeah, it begins with the initial, I'm going to say the initial call, but initially it's an email because they're typically responding to an ad that I have on, let's say, BizBuySell or BizQuest, which is the two largest internet sites for businesses for sale. I require or request, if they're interested, they have to send me what I call a buyer profile, which gives me some background information. It tells me where they live, tells me what's their background, what are they presently doing. It gives me a thumbnail sketch of their financial statement. If they're calling me on a business that's far exceeds their financial capabilities, then we need to understand what their investment capabilities are. There's no sense looking at a business that costs $500,000 when they can invest 30 or 50. Sure. They're going to need to go to the bank. And if the financial statements on this business aren't strong enough to go to the bank, this is not something they're going to be able to handle. So we ask questions. I ask, why did you call on this? What are you looking for? Sometimes they just want to make money, or they've always wanted to own a flower shop, or they always wanted to, buy an ice cream store. I'm not sure why, but they did. And say, okay, so their background sometimes lends itself to this. Sometimes I get investors that are calling and they want to buy something that they're going to run as an absentee owner. Most small businesses that we deal with don't function that way. They need to be owner operated, unfortunately. In other words, they're not that you're just buying a job, but if you're not there and you're not putting in the hours and you've got a full-time job and you're going to go there at night to pick up the money, or you're going to go there to check the books, then you need a very reliable person to run it for you, and you have to pay for that. And most small businesses, cash flow doesn't warrant a $30, $40, or $50,000 manager. That $30, $40, $50,000 should be going into your pocket plus the profit. That's why you're buying it. and sometimes they don't quite get that initially, and so when you get into that conversation, they realize what they called on isn't really what they're looking for, and that's a good conversation to have initially, because it saves everybody time and energy. And I certainly don't want to not burden, but bring a person out to my client who's really not qualified to buy that business. My job is to not do that for my client, which is the person selling usually.
So you shared a couple of portals. Is that kind of the infrastructure of your marketing? How are you also, acquiring the sellers? So you shared that BizQuest and some of these people where they're searching to possibly look at the client that you have per se, helping them sell their business. What's some of those types of operations that you do and marketing portals that you have?
Yeah, by the way, sometimes our to get a listing, it could come from something that I'm advertising. So they see that I have a restaurant or a hair salon or whatever that might be, and they say, hey, by the way, I'm thinking about selling mine. I saw your listings. Can you tell me about how you go about that? But more times than not, it's referred from. I think originally you and I talked about where we might have connected through a networking group that we were participating in going back a number of years. But attorneys, accountants who have clients that are looking to, people sell a business because they're looking to retire. There's a change in their personal situation. It might be health, it might be family. Maybe the business isn't doing as well as they need it to do, or they found another business that they want to go into and they decided they want to sell their business. I have a gentleman that I helped sell. He owned 3 Dairy Queens, and over the last 3 years, we sold those Dairy Queens. He had been a franchisee for 14 years and just didn't want to do it anymore. Very successful. And we helped find buyers for each of those stores in different communities. Dairy Queen refers to me because of my franchise background, and the fact that I had some success early on in selling one of their stores. When they have an individual in the marketplace that wants to sell, they'll refer them to us. CarX does the same thing from time to time. But more times than not, it comes from someone that I have a relationship with, that I've met, that we've done work for in the past. If an attorney, when we help a person sell their business, the buyer or the seller sometimes needs an attorney to handle the transaction. We can refer them to someone that can do that. In return, then that they'll refer back to us because we've helped them and we've worked together and we know our styles and they work well together. But even then, in referring an attorney, you need somebody that's affordable, that understands the nuance of selling a business. If they're not in that, if they're a divorce attorney or a bankruptcy attorney, and they may not have the, not that it's rocket scientist, but a sort of a comfort level with guiding someone through that process, and also controlling the cost of that. And that's really important, particularly in a small business transaction, that the legal fees don't go crazy.
You shared a little bit of the foundation of where you came from, right? The infrastructure of being inside entrepreneurial, a couple great brands that you learned from. And now that turned into, they're actually clients of yours in a sense, right? They bring you those referrals.
Yeah,
that's a big deal. A lot of people that try to get into their own business go way off the deep end out of what they don't know, because they hear that it's, oh, that makes money, right? So that's an interesting perspective that you bring to the table, and really wise. So let's go into a little bit about, when you started your actual company, the infrastructure. What did you start to put as far as just systems together? Did you start thinking like, hey, I also need a virtual assistant? How is that day to day for you now compared to when you first started?
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, when I first started, one of the keys was, how do you market the business and where do you advertise it? And the internet and the business sites were becoming popular, but we at the time weren't using them. And so I had to research that, figure out how best to take advantage of that. And that meant, writing ads that were now going on the internet as opposed to being a small ad in a newspaper. The other part, you had to figure out what you did best, and finding businesses for sale sometimes involved, calling on companies, and the gentleman that I worked for, another gentleman was there, did a lot of that. I didn't enjoy that. Cold calling businesses to see if they were interested in selling wasn't, I could do it, and I've done it over the years, but to me, it was a waste of my time. And so when I started my own business, I actually hired a young lady who worked for me part-time. And if I had a pizza shop in Buffalo Grove that was for sale, but the guy who called was in Naperville, and if he was interested, we could find him a business in Naperville. But that means someone had to get on the phone and call those people in Naperville and say, hey, I've got a client that wants to buy something. Have you ever thought about selling? I can hand that list off to a young lady, and she could make those couple hundred calls and narrow those warm leads down, so I could then follow up on that. Going back to your question, and I was trying to remember exactly what you were specifically looking for me to address, how things have changed. Networking, joining chambers of commerce, sort of being part of the community that you're involved in helps build your reputation and establishing your ability to do what you say you can do. And that's a little different than it used to be. Today, with this visualization and not being able to go out and see clients, we still do, by the way. We still have to show a business. We require everybody wears a mask when we go and visit. We give them the heads up as to how we're going to do this so that they follow the protocol. Nobody objects to that. They understand that you're trying to be safe, not just for you, but for them. And those visits are usually short and sweet. A lot of what we do is sending them information via email, financial statements on the company once they've signed an NDA, giving them profit and loss statements, answering their questions. They'll send you a laundry list of questions that you'll address online now, whereas you used to do that over the phone and used to do it by when you personally met with them. So a lot of technology and a lot of those types of things. A website. I had I'll call it a crappy website, because it was initially just something I put together. But when I get involved with people like yourself, and you go to these meetings and you meet guys that do web, and you meet guys that do online marketing, and they're saying, you really need to clean that up a little bit. It needs to be better. And when I decided I was also going to be reaching out to attorneys and accountants directly, I needed a website for credibility. They needed to know who I was before they called me or they reached out to me. And so developing a professional website was important. I don't drive traffic to it like I should, but it's important to have it. So if you call me and say, Joe, who are you? I said, well, here's my website, please, check it out. You'll see some of the businesses that I have listed. So that was an important piece that I didn't have, that I got much better at over the last 3 or 4 years. And it helps quite a bit to establish a sort of a picture of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, it lends credibility. It lends perception is reality, right? You're not just some Absolutely. Guy sitting at his house and calling people, right? So, and I'm sure, I know I got a chance to kind of go through it. It's pretty detailed. It shares some insights onto your passion about how you're engaging with these buying and selling opportunities. So, pretty awesome. So, we've gone through a bit of the marketing side, some operational things that you've done, systematizing, getting out of, being in a role of an employee. We talk about a lot in this channel of employee, which is, trading hours for dollars, usually self-employed, which, you go on your own and here I am, I'm in business. And then you go to business owner, which now you start to scale and you start to have people with you and you've got systems. Nowadays, it could be even a business owner mindset with all the technology and everything that's going on, which sounds like kind of you're in. Tell us a little bit about that side. So how have you transitioned from those early days of kind of a self-employed guy, knowing that you didn't want to, only represent one brand, you wanted to be a little bit broader, to now really, do you feel like you're in that business owner pilot chair, that things are systematized, or are you still growing to that part of it, would you say?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably a little bit of both. I'm not sure you ever get to exactly where you want to be, because there's always things changing, and you have to be flexible, and you got to see that there's changes that need to be made. things like right now doing the Zoom call, the backgrounds and the things you change those to make them look better. So, but I also have a part-time gentleman who works for me. I found that when you get to a certain level of listings, that there's only so many you can do justice to yourself. And so when you got past a dozen and you started doing 18 or 20, you needed to hand those off to somebody. And so I have a couple of people that I can do that with. They're not necessarily full-time. And then depending on the activity, then they can jump in and take things. They know how to do it because I've taught them how to do it. I've also hired some people in the past, and sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. I had a young lady that I hired a number of years ago, and she was wonderful, but her personal situation changed where her husband lost his job, and she had to go back work full time, where she worked for me part time. And she had a couple of young children at home, and this was a good fit. She could do it from home. Well, home offices now are everybody's doing it, but I found years ago that I didn't need an office. If you're buying a business in Naperville, you're not driving to Northbrook to meet me before you go back to look at the business in Naperville. So they weren't coming to my office. So when I started my own business, I started from home and realized that that was fine. It wasn't really a detriment or something that wasn't looked down on or was looked down on. And now it's commonplace, but it something that I found that most of what I do was in the field. If I'm selling a business, I'm going out to the business. If I'm showing it, I'm going to the business. They don't need to come visit me first to do that. And I can get the background information. I can answer their questions on the phone. We can do things via email. And now we can do these types of calls. So offices is even less important, as is the overhead of that. My wife would probably like me not to be working at home, but I have my own area where I get away. So yeah, things have changed.
Yeah, and you share a perspective. You kind of said, hey, that the website was something that you were kind of shared with a few times. You listened to it. You were coachable from people that had shared a perspective, right? And you changed your website. You got a little bit more robust there, and you invested some time and money. What kind of startup capital is needed, you think, to kind of get into your business? And have you seen a need for maybe a line of credit throughout the years to inject more capital into the business, or do you take a certain percentage of your fees and allocate it towards things that you need to run your business, besides obviously paying yourself and paying your bills as well? So
yeah, the interesting is there's not a lot of overhead in what I do and what brokers do. The biggest expense is advertising, because you have to market the businesses that you have. But because you don't have a storefront or an office, you don't have those expenses. It's the initial startup. If I'm interviewing someone for a job to work for me, they need to know that it could be 6 months. It could be longer than that before they make their first commission. And therefore, they need to be funded personally to get through that. They're starting their own business. They're not getting paid a salary. And so they need to have the wherewithal to ramp up. It takes a while to get business listings and people to refer to you, and that gets in the way of doing what I do when you start. Doesn't mean you can't do it, and there are a lot of successful brokers out there who have 5 and 6 and more brokers that work for them, and they so you can take this to whatever level you want based on what you bring to the table and what your expertise is, or what your need is. If you need to make X amount of dollars, if it's 50,000, 100,000, 200,000, and you know how many businesses you have to sell within that window to accomplish that, and how do you get there? How do you get that many listings? How do you handle that many sales? So there is a formula to get there. It depends on what the individual's end goal is. To me, this is towards the end of my career as opposed to the beginning of my career, so it's a little bit different end goal. And maybe at some point I'll sell, or I'll turn it over to someone else, and I can still be the so-called face, or the name of the company and the reputation is valuable, but someone else could push the buttons and make it work, and then I can be more of an advisory role, which I would probably enjoy doing. I'm not ready to go play golf yet, so I just keep doing what I'm doing. But we have the ability sometimes to give people advice, not just in doing what I'm doing, but in the businesses that they're going into, what they need to do to be successful in that business. And sometimes it's giving them some guidance and direction as to how to market that company and how to get sales from where it is to where it needs to be. And if I can't do it, I can put them in touch with people that can help them do that. There's times when they do need financing. You and I have talked about this. There's times when they need funding to buy a business, to expand. And so, we should consider that conversation on another call. But so they may need an attorney, they may need an accountant. We can give them referrals to do that with, and it's one of the services that we do provide.
So what's one of the ways that you safeguard yourself from being not only just a nurturing person, which seems like you're very open to, hey, let's have a conversation, let me walk you through this journey. You get a lead or you get some sort of perspective, but in your type of business, you're not getting paid hourly. You're not sitting there making $40 for this hour and the next hour. You're eventually going to get paid some sort of fee. So tell the audience really, if you could share, how is it that you actually get paid, and then how do you safeguard yourself from time, being wasted at times, because that can be part of the nuance of this business.
Yeah, that's a good question. We get paid as a percentage of the sale price. If you're selling a house, the broker's fees are usually 5%. When you're selling a business, it's 10%. A little different. Some get 12. So and I didn't set those rules. That's what the standards are for the industry. We're licensed, and we have guidelines that we have to follow. But the typical commission to a business broker is a percentage of the sale price, which means we don't get paid until we sell the business. Now, there are companies that charge upfront fees, marketing fees, retainer fees. I found that I started that way years and years ago, and it got in the way. If I know I'm going to be successful with that listing, I'm going to get paid anyway. So I'm going to front the money, and I'm not going to make that an impediment for them to sign on with me because they've got to pay me $500 for advertising. I really don't need that. And so, but to your point, yes, you tend to you end up giving a lot of free advice. But I will tell you that that's also an expense that you have to be able to be willing to share your time that way, because that's what brings you business. I've talked to people 2 years ago that come back and tell me they want to sell their business, but when I originally contacted them, they weren't interested. But because of the conversations that we had and the advice I had given, when they were ready, they wanted to get back in touch with me. So that was helpful. I've had people who didn't list with me, and then I'll get a call from someone else who they talked to and said, you should talk to Joe because here's the experience. We didn't end up selling our business, but that free advice, that guidance and direction, and maybe that homespun approach that I take sometimes, which I don't know where that comes from, but it helps because those people then they'll then refer me to someone that they know. I've worked with individuals that I have sold multiple businesses for, and over the years they'll come back again. So yeah, the tendency is to maybe expound too much, and that might be a waste of time. I had guys who say, Joe, why would you sell a business when you make $5,000 when you can sell one where you can make $50,000? Well, that's a good question, but there are times when those ones that you make $5,000, it pays the mortgage because you didn't sell anything that month, and it was a smaller transaction. And there's not always that many big transactions that are out there, and sometimes they don't sell. So you can't just have be elephant hunting all the time, going after the big deals, because if they don't happen, you don't make any money because you don't get paid until you sell. So you have a sort of a mix, and there has to be a balance there. And yeah, sometimes you need to watch. Going back to my comment earlier about advising people up front whether this is a good fit or not. There's the time saver. There's no sense going down the road, sending them financial statements and answering all their questions, and before you even get there, this doesn't work for them. I'd rather head that off sooner than later If they want to continue to pursue it, fine. But if I'm candid with them that it's not a good fit, I don't have to answer 12 questions about something I know isn't what they're looking for. So it's better to be a little bit upfront and clear as to what this opportunity is that you're looking to buy uh, once I know what they're looking for. Because I can, over the years, you learn that what works and what doesn't work. And you're not always right, but in most cases you are.
Definitely. And I hear what I hear is that initial discovery call is so important.
Yeah.
Learning exactly what you are about to engage with. Do you use any type of, I guess, commitment letter, just informally, or do you just proceed without something signed? Because I know that you're not asking for a fee like you used to upfront, but do you have some sort of at least agreement?
Yeah, on the sell side, there's a listing agreement. So if you said,
Okay.
hey, I want to sell my restaurant, then I'll go visit it and we'll meet and I'll look at financial statements because we have to determine what the value of that business is first. And that's also a bit of a free service because if we can't agree on the price of what it's worth, you may think it's worth X, and I think people usually pay 2 times cash flow. Well, if you want 5 times cash flow, no one's buying that business. I don't care what you tell me. You might have spent that money to open it, but that's not relevant today. People buy it based on what it's making, not what it cost. And that's typical. So yes, they sign a listing agreement. It's usually a 6-month agreement. It gives me exclusive right to sell. And I tend to work with sellers rather than buyers because buyers will call up and say, Joe, can you find me a business? Yes and no. If I don't know exactly what you want and you don't know exactly what you want, I'm wasting my time. So you tend to work with sellers and then you bring the buyers to the table and then you screen the buyers knowing what they're looking for to see if that's a matchup for what you have. And obviously the buyers aren't paying you, it's coming from the seller. So the contract in our relationship contractually is with the seller.
What is maybe the split of time, just to kind of share that perspective that came to my mind here? You obviously have the agreement with the seller, but you also have mentioned throughout this interview that you do spend a significant amount of time with the buyer as well, and you're promoting and marketing and these types of things, and that could lead to eventual sale of something else as well. So what's maybe the split of time in your mind of how you spend your time currently?
Most of it's with buyers. Once you have the listing, then you spend all of your time finding a buyer for that listing. And the only time you circle back with the seller is when you have a showing or when you have a question that's come up or you needed some updated financial information. So that's a good, I spend most of my time communicating with people that are inquiring about something that I have for sale. Now, I also spend time with marketing, meaning to get new listings. But once I have the listing, once we get a buyer and we get an offer in place, which I help implement through a letter of intent, and then you're working with attorneys to complete the transaction. Now you're back onto the sell side again, where you're working with the seller and their advisors to complete the sale. As the broker, we're sort of a conduit between both the buyer and the seller's attorneys, because there's usually attorneys on both sides. A purchase agreement is prepared by the buyer, submitted to the seller's attorney, but I want to be involved in that because sometimes the language in there doesn't really match up to what we've agreed to, because it's a stock agreement that some attorney prepared. We have to go through the process of getting them approved by the landlord to take over, because most businesses are leased, not where you're buying. When you buy a hair salon, you're in a strip center or a street location, you don't own the building. And even in restaurants, in more cases than not, they're leased. So you then reach out to the landlord, because now I have to get that buyer approved by the landlord. That's my job. And send him whatever he wants. So a lot of it's on the buy side as far as the time that we spend once we have a listing in place.
No, it's interesting. I'm actually outside of this life working on something similar. Family finds out that the husband dies of a grocery store owner in a Latino community. a gentleman gets furloughed as a chef from one of the higher end hotels in downtown Chicago. And it's interesting just to kind of see that dynamic, right? And I was able to refer to a business lawyer friend of mine, and just seeing those conversations. But you noted something so huge, right? If someone's leasing, now you have to convince the owner of that building, hey, do I want this operator, this creditworthiness operator to be a part of the lease, right? So a lot of dynamic in there. Obviously your business, a little bit longer sales cycle.
Yes.
What's one thing that you can share that you've been able to, I guess, manage your cash flow and manage the way that you bring in your funds to have lasted so many years, and give a different perspective of that side. And we'll start ending the interview with some of the CEO factors too. So
keep in mind that I've been doing this as an independent for close to 14 years, and you get to the point where you have a steady flow of listings coming in just because of the presence that you have. There was a time when that wasn't the case, and you're wondering where your next list is coming from, and things are not selling. But as I mentioned earlier, your out-of-pocket expenses are not prohibitive like they are in a retail location where you have rent and utilities and insurance and all those things you have to carry, whether you're selling pizzas or whether you're not. So my out-of-pocket expenses are not crazy prohibitive, but in the beginning, you did have to have funds in the bank to get you through that window. But once it starts, once you begin to sell, and once you have listings in place, you know that they're going to sell within that 6-month window. Sometimes it's 3 months, sometimes it's a year. But if you have enough of them in the pipeline, they're popping out of the other end with some regularity. Now, you could go 3 or 4 months where you don't sell something, and hopefully then it's one of those bigger sales that come in where you pick up a nice commission. And other times where you could do 3 or 4 in 1 month. So it's a little bit crazy, but on the other hand, over the years, I found that I don't worry about it as much because it tends to be okay. In the beginning, I was like, oh, I'm not sure this is working. And maybe I need to get, and by the way, in the beginning, I did have part-time jobs. I did other things other than a business broker. I did whatever I had to do. I sold advertising. I did some other things that allowed me to generate some revenue while I was ramping up to get this thing going. But you got to a point where then it did work. And then that part of it is, now this coming year with all the problems and pandemics and things, is it going to have an impact on us? Hopefully not, because people are still out there looking, but people looking to sell sometimes are selling because they're troubled. And that takes a different type of buyer to buy that thing when they're really not doing very well, but they still sell, but at a much lower price point. But good businesses, people are still open to buying them because if it avoids the pandemic and it's still successful, then that revenue has a lot of value.
for sure, and succession planning, ladies and gentlemen, is something that, if an owner is on here listening to this, I hope that you're listening to Joe and really getting a good perspective of how he thinks to help you broker sell that business. But also think about, before times like this in 2020 with the pandemic, whenever you're going to be listening to this, think about succession planning even before you start. You have a dilemma, something that hurts your business, that actually devalues your business, and what you thought you could get no longer is. You have to face that reality. So interesting time, and thanks for your perspective, Joe. So we like to end the Go for CEO interviews usually with something we call the CEO perspective, right? So C is for client experience. Can you share with us, I guess, a differentiating proposition that you and Signature Business Group bring to the table in client experience?
Okay. I mentioned earlier a certain amount of trust that needs to be established, and I think my company has the ability to do that reasonably quick, based on the conversations that we have with individuals, and you meet with them and personally and empathize with what they're doing and find out why they want to sell, and then explain how you can help them. And if you can establish that trust early on, and I've been able to do that successfully over the years, that has helped quite a bit. The fact also that we're small, we're not a big company. We also have the ability to spend the time and energy to help them complete the project, as opposed to it just being another number on the page of, the number of listings that we sell. And if we don't sell it, it's no big deal. We take a personal interest in completing that project because we have the ability to do that because of our size. So I think that's helps or has helped establish Signature as a company that, under the right circumstances, we can be the right company to help you sell your business or find a business.
Awesome. And the next one is employee engagement. I know that you're not scaled out enormously, but you do have some really strong ties to some people that kind of help you and bring you a part-time value as well. What are some reasons that, as that perspective, that relationship, why do they stay with Signature and use your group?
Well, similar. Where there are individuals that I have that I know I can go to them because they're good at what they do, and I'm pretty selective as to who I want to refer out to clients of mine or friends of mine or business acquaintances of mine. So I do my homework on those, and I get to know those people individually, not just from their business perspective, but who they are. And because of that, then they're comfortable with me, because we've taken that step to, it's not just business and money, it's a relationship, and people look for that when they hire companies on. So I think that's an important way of establishing your business and creating an atmosphere about who you are and what you do. It's how you interface with other people, employees, outside groups that provide services to us. I go out of my way to make sure that those relationships are strong, so that there's no question that when the time comes, we're gonna work together.
That's great. And operational excellence, you again shared throughout the interviews a couple of tweaks and things that you've done, some of the systems that you use in operating your business. But what is that next level proposition that you bring to the table?
Well, a couple of things. One of the things that we important part of the end goal for us is to determine what the value of that business is. And we have to spend a fair amount of time analyzing the financial statements. Sometimes businesses don't report, their books and records aren't as good as they should be. And there are expenses and things that aren't being reflected properly. And so you really need to spend time digging through that, because what they show on their tax returns isn't necessarily what they're actually doing. And so getting that in order, getting that organized, helping them, because if I just take what they show and it's a multiple of that, the business isn't worth anywhere near what it's worth. It's worth a whole lot more than that. So we have to dig down, figure out what it is, ask the right questions. If you got all your insurance and your phones and your kids' phones and your kids all on you got to get that out of there. You got to put that down at what we call an add back to the bottom line. And you mark up all their financial statements, and then you get it to where it says, okay, this looks pretty good. I didn't realize, and I write all these things off. That's really income to you. You may not show it at the bottom line, but if you're paying an expense with it, it's still income. Yeah,
and a prospective business owner wants to see that. I mean, I run into businesses that the owner, literally had 10 Cadillacs on the expense report, and you're like, 10 Cadillacs? What's that? Oh, everybody in the family had a Cadillac. So interesting, and obviously you're going to get that money back. But what a great discussion, and Joe, I really obviously appreciate the time here. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of value. They may even be excited to start their own brokerage business. But I would tell you, go learn from a guy like Joe. Become a mentee before you become a mentor, right? And there's so many things that you can listen to. You heard also the perspective of being an entrepreneur, where Joe, learned a ton of situations with a brand that he was in. Maybe you're in marketing today, maybe you're at a bigger company, maybe you're a small company, but you're starting to develop your acumen in the futuristic side of how I could start even a part-time business and complement what I'm doing on a daily basis. So Joe, any final last words that you'd like to share? And then we're going to tune in with you in about 6 to 12 months and just rejoin the Signature Business Group and see where you're at in about 6 to 12 months. But any last words?
Just one. I've never done a podcast before, so this is my first. And I was a little concerned and worried about, how that was going to play out. And I have to give you credit as the host. You have a way of, keeping the conversation focused and asking questions, allowing me to kind of expand on things that I know, but I wasn't quite sure how to present them. So it's been enjoyable. Hopefully the audience gets some value from what we've been able to talk, but feel free to reach out and touch base. If you have a question or two, you can reach. Am I allowed to tell them my website?
Oh yeah, please. Yeah, tell all your contact info.
It's signaturebusinessgroup.com, and it gives you sort of an overview of our company and what we do. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. You can shoot me an email or give me a holler on the phone. We'd love to chat and maybe be of some service. John, I want to thank you again for your time today, and hopefully, we've done some good today.
I know we have, and give them that phone number, and I'll also put it in the information description when I post everything. But go ahead with the phone number.
Yeah, the phone number is 708-702-2726.
Awesome. No better way than to leave you with a direct contact to Joe. Experience this again. Hopefully you replay some of the areas that I think were very valuable in marketing, operations, scaling, understanding kind of your background and how to get into business for yourself. So thank you again for coming on to the Go for CEO channel. Smash that like button. I don't do this enough. I'm supposed to do it at the beginning. Subscribe to the channel. Tell your friends about us. Learn about all these industries. Joe, I sent them a gentleman that started a farm, and he was nice to share a little bit of his perspective on that. And I'm getting all these requests. Hey, do this industry. So excited to keep on going. And thank you so much, Joe, for joining the Go for CEO channel.
Thank you for having me on, and have a good weekend.
You too.
Take care now.